The standard flies high. A tattered robin eggscloth with a white fist crudely splattered upon it glides silently beneath the bell tower in the ruins of what was once the Cathedral of Comfort. The fountain of blessings where the young private and his comrades huddle for warmth has long since run dry. Snow begins to fall. A sergeant approaches with messenger boy in tow. The private and his friends remain seated. They remembered all too well what happened the last time any Grimsby officer was addressed publicly. Malachian lightnings are everywhere, and there are still crimson reminders of their deathly accuracy staining the young private's uniform. The sergeant looked straight at the young private. The messenger boy addressed him. The now young corporal is to take a platoon of men and assault a lightly guarded cannon battery. A platoon being 4 soldiers, lightly guarded being 50 Malachian regulars. The wars of Grimsby and independence were harsh times. In pitch black, through the White Lady's loving embrace, the young corporal and his platoon struggled through thick forests, rocky footpaths, and blinding light. The remnants of a barn and a small bonfire within looms in the distance. Next to them, a row of cannons, 5-pounders, 8-pounders, 10, each and every one of them responsible for the death of his comrades in arms, or of poor defenseless Grimsbian citizens. Malachians, like termites, infest the homestead. The corporal turns to his 2 soldiers. The more accurate of the 2 took up position behind a large outcropping where the farm's former occupants lay. Still frozen solid in the patriarch's hand is a letter of commendation for a bountiful harvest. Upon it, the seal of the crimson twisted claw is unmistakable. The mad king and harridan of Malachia had little regard for even their most loyal subjects, let alone those who dare dissent. The older but slightly less experienced marker nods. The corporal turns to the thickets behind them. Silence. The other private, who is not much younger than the corporal, yet not much older than the messenger boy, had a crossbow, flintlock, and dagger. The young corporal looked down at the termites. Coverage is more important. With the same finger he used to show his mother which confection he desired from her bakery a few short years ago, the young corporal points firmly at the crossbow. The archer slithers behind the outcropping and took position next to the patriarch's young daughter, still clinging tightly to her father. The corporal turns to the thickets behind them. Silence. The 3 stare at each other. It is mere seconds, but an eon's worth of torment is shared. With a solemn nod, the corporal signals to the marker and archer to begin the assault. Unblinking eyes scan the termite horde, giving the corporal free rein to accomplish what he must, no matter the cost. An errant regular looks to relieve himself before returning back to the comfort of the bonfire. Before the young corporal could withdraw his hatchet, the archer found his mark. The bolt rams through the Malachian's eye slit, immediately returning that wayward soul to the Maker's judgment. As the storm grew in ferocity, the regulars standing guard slowly drift back inside the barn. For now, they have much more to fear from the White Lady than the royal axeman. Through brief glimpses of clarity, the corporal can see the market archer urging him forward. The path to the guns is now clear. With haste, the corporal reaches the first 5-pounder. Using the ferocious howling as cover, the corporal swiftly removes the shocks and braces from the cannon and rolls in towards the cliff's edge. A particularly shrill kiss from the lady cuts his countenance open as he heaves a massive gun into the waters below. More guns remain. The 20-pounder mocks him. Bleeding, bitten, and exhausted, Corporal is now about to leave his mission unaccomplished. Even with great effort, the stubborn cannon with a bad wheel would barely budge. The marker and archer gestures surreptitiously, hoping that their leader and companion would return. Slowly and surely, the massive gun creeps closer to its demise. At last, the 20 is at the edge, ready to drown. The young corporal gave a moment of thought to what will befell the surviving termites, now resting fitfully in that broken, lukewarm, ill-gotten dormitory. Malachian vengeance is as cruel as it is excruciating. The cannon plummets. He turns around and comes face to face with a stunned regular. On instinct, the corporal delivers a hatchet blow that sent the regular's helmet into parts unknown. His second blow went right between young Malachian's frightful, pleading eyes. And then his third, and fourth, fifth. He ignores his comrades, desperately gesticulating wildly for him to cease. Every blow was a reminder of something the veteran lost. His bakery, his friends, his hometown, his platoon comrade now missing in the cold. One final blow. His pillows rent flat. The veteran's heart threatens to break his ribcage. He struggles for breath. A decade ago, yet the scars were still as fresh as yesterday. The physical agony, the screams, the carnage, the lost. What was his name? The poor soul now eternally betrothed to the White Lady. Gustave? Gaston? Gunther? The veteran wants to remember. And yet, the rooster crows. What is important is that he must now go to the armory. His workday has begun. The quartermaster of the guard enters and politely greets the veteran armorer. The veteran nods. Guardsmen cart an assortment of arms that need repair, tuning, and adjusting. A moment of friendly small talk ensues. Anything to take the weary veteran's mind off the horrors of the past. This conversation, just like the last, is to no avail. Both men know, as soon as the quartermaster left, the veteran's thoughts will return to the bloody battlefields of the past. The quartermaster futilely wishes the armorer a good day. The veteran can only nod. The weapons left behind by the quartermaster will take an entire day of work to complete for any other armorer. By mid-afternoon, the veteran is finished. Now, only his thoughts occupy him. Thoughts of war, thoughts of suffering. A young couple in love walks past his shop. The veteran sees too many faces like the young man's, wearing both Grimsby and Malachian uniforms. He remembers how so many of these faces were shattered beyond recognition by blows, blades, and bullets. As for the young man's paramour, the Malachian onslaught was relentless. Any and all enemies of that twisted royal cabal are never given any quarter. or mercy. Only the frozen barbarians up north rival the Malachian royals in their malignity. Grimsbyans know this firsthand. So many villages, towns, and cities annihilated. The elderly, the men, the children, none were spared. The women, especially the attractive ones. There's a special fate for them in Malachian hands. A familiar face snaps a veteran from all the pretty and handsome faces defiled by the sins of man. An authoritative, elderly gentleman with his signature hat and truncheon, followed by his watchman entourage, approaches the veteran's workshop, where he is not levying baleful maledictions upon the very birth of a crooked burglar or a Malachian spy. The septuagenarian thief-taker was a genial man, stern yet kind, but old, very old. The taker ambled to the front door and tips his hat. The taker then informs the weary veteran of what was already known, but dreaded all the same. The sun is almost entirely gone now. Good sir, it is time. An ear-splitting whinny signals the arrival of the casualty carriage. Before the young corporal could assist, Grimsbyan soldiers have already swarmed and emptied the carriage of his cadavers. He blinks his eyes, and the thunderous carriage vanishes as he returns to battle for more casualties. He follows the peals of the wounded and dying inside. His platoon is in there. His archer friend lies in bed from consumption, with his marker friend sitting nearby. The young man tries to smile and joke, but his frequent coughing fits impede his ability to do so. Several beds over, a lieutenant much older than his years is doing his best to console and cajole his subordinate officer who is in the throes of bawling like a scared child. Wall duty does that to the strongest of men. The hardened commander, a survivor from the very first Grimsbyan war until now, weeping at the thought of going back to that accursed wall. The young corporal looks at the royal hospital beds. There is a messenger boy, faithful to his sergeant to the very end. The apothecary comforts the boy as he drapes a white blanket over the man's scarred face. The words rot inside the corporal as he stands up. He approaches the bewildered lieutenant and lacrimal sergeant and waits to be addressed. Speak up, corporal. The corporal vomits forth. Forgive my impudence. The sergeant that promoted me has just passed. If it is in need of Grimsby, let me be promoted for wall duty. A slow, wan smile creeps across the officer's face. The next words almost strike the young corporal dead. He would be honored to have you take his place. The nearly inconsolable sergeant is ushered to much-needed rest, while the lieutenant takes charge of the now leaderless messenger boy. In a few, the now sergeant returns to the archer's bed. He squeezes the archer's hand tight. The pat on the marker's shoulder did little to assuage him of both the archer's well-being and the former corporal's necessary duty. The wall. Those who knew didn't like to talk much about it. It is a long walk to what remains of a schoolhouse long obliterated by Malachian cannonade, with much of the students in t-shirts still inside. A reminder, a casus belli, a war cry. A different atrocity takes place there now. The sergeant grimaces at the gleefully and crudely misspelled sign that hung on the last standing wall of that schoolhouse. The stoic corporal imperceptibly nods at his superior as 3 privates step forth. One is shaking like a leaf, Without hesitation, the sergeant traced places with the fearful private, saving him from the lash. The sergeant and his fellow executioners walked towards the three deserters. The condemned were already bound with a bag over their head and kneeling in front of a dish still filled with the frozen bodies from yesterday. The sergeant couldn't tell who was grieving harder, the sergeant he replaced, or the man he's about to sentence. He gives the order as he raises his rifle to the back of the hooded man's head. His victim wails louder. The difficult trigger pull jolts him awake. Gary? The veteran curses his own imbecility. But it isn't only the name of his crossbow-wielding comrade that he wishes to recall. He never knew the name of those pitiful deserters he buried at the wall. It's only fitting that the executioner remembers the name of his victims. Yet, it doesn't matter. He couldn't remember the name of the young archer, taking his prime by a wretched disease. What's the use in knowing the name of any of those poor men? It would just be more names for him to forget. The rooster crows. A colonel he has never seen before haughtily demands him to refurbish and polish a rack of sidearms and swords. A troop of disoriented and harangued enlisted quickly and gingerly, but all the accoutrements be serviced. The sharply dressed man then smugly informs the armorer that a man of such talents needs little more than 2 days, and that expects these arms to be finished and in mint condition upon pickup. The veteran must finish before dinner. The gleaming and polished weapons remind him further of all the ones that were caked in grime and gore. Outside, the local school has released their charges for the day. The children watch him with a mixture of awe and fear. A year ago, they asked the veteran about the war. They thought he would never stop screaming. He thought he would never stop screaming. The veteran waves weakly. The children return the favor and favor the thronging masses. A familiar face and voice. Good sir, it is time. All is lost. Old Grimsby has already been razed to the ground. The Malachians march forward relentlessly. The only hope is to get any and all surviving Grimsbyans south to rebuild a new nation. Thousands of souls await salvation in the harbor as the hastily cobbled Grimsby Navy ferry them from damnation to safety at all hours of the day. All that remains, all that can be done, is to buy time with every drop of blood available. The older sergeant looks into the eyes of someone whose blood has already been spent. And another. And another. Then, it was the marker's eyes. Before he could register, that 4-man platoon was down to 1. A panicked cry from his lookout distracts him. Over the hill, the accursed flag, bearing the crimson claw, flew high as a dreadful march sounds from the distance. Not far behind the company of regulars is a battery being rolled into position. The first charge has been repulsed by a tremendous cost. Now more the enemy has come for the second. Surveying this grim scene, the sergeant turns to his troops, then towards the sea. There are still too many people to evacuate. It is decided. They will all die here today. To the last man, this wrecked former mansion would be a mausoleum filled to the brim with the blood of the free and the oppressor, erected in the defense of all those who seek a new life, a better life. No species here, no time for that. Just a stern look of determination. The replies were as swift as they were varied. Resolve, fury, melancholy, catatonia, resignation. The sergeant turns back to the approaching horde. Then, an emblem catches his eye. Not black, not silver, not even gold. Ruby. The ruby claw. One of the officers leading the regulars is Malachian royalty. Without hesitation, he addresses the artillery. The men manning the cannon began making their adjustments. Then he summons a particularly sharp-eyed archer. The sergeant levies his own rifle. The new archer and the sergeant peer eagerly through the remains of what was once a window. No one dares to breathe. The Malachian officer steps too close. Fire. The canister shot merely winged the marching company, but shocked and staggered the officer. Loose. The bolt found its way into the chest of a bodyguard next to the officer. Before the officer can give the order, the sergeant fires, shattering the glass. Glass? But the window was long devoid of glass. The dying nobleman clutched his chest as the glasses he was wearing began to slip from his nose. His wizened, clean-shaven face wrenched in terror. Glasses? Shaved? The royal was a bearded man with a monocle. The veteran freezes. As the mansion melts into his homestead, with clear eyes he can see through 2 broken window panes his neighbor slump, dead. The screams of dead and dying soldiers are replaced with the shrieks and cries of women and children. Turning to his other window, a dark figure, with all the speed his ailing frame could muster, rapidly approaches. His friend, the thief-taker, is already at his door, his voice commanding, yet laden with disappointment. The old taker raps the door sharply. "Good sir, what have you done?" The martial magistrate and his court sits silent. A few of the more tender ones weep quietly. The criminal explains his woes, not as a defense or excuse. He wishes merely to illuminate how the events of that tragic night unfolded. The criminal takes full responsibility, and his only wish is that his beloved service would be honored, and his fellow men-at-arms, past and present, will be treated with the admiration and respect they deserved. The veterans of Grimsby are an honored lot, but Lexia favors none, and those who break the law must pay on her behalf and the Maker's. The martial magistrate finds the defendant guilty of murder. The penalty is to be delivered at dawn. The rooster crows. A small gathering is present. The noose is slipped around the condemned's neck. The condemned declines his blindfold. Some of the crowd departs. Last week's sentencing of the highwayman had a more lively and festive gathering. This is a solemn occasion. The good pater issues the last rites. The condemned accepts, though he has long forgotten whether he still believes in the Maker. If the Maker deems him worthy, then all will be well. If there is no Maker, at least he will no longer have to worry. And if the Maker denies him, well, the veteran is no stranger to perdition. The gallows drop. The nightmares, the carnage, the horrors, they begin to fade. Gustav, Jerry, Benji. The veteran sleeps.